You are completely incompetent! Give me this! You don't deserve to use it! Get back to work right now! Do exactly as I say! You have been working on this floor for days! This is completely unacceptable! Please stop it! Do you really know whom treating this way? This is just an old, poor janitor. You belong under my foot!
Oh?
Picture this. A long, sunlit hallway inside one of the wealthiest homes in the country. Chandeliers catching the afternoon light. Portraits watching from every wall like silent witnesses. A young woman stands frozen mid-sentence, her finger extended, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet of that hallway, aimed at a gray-haired man kneeling on the floor with a hammer still resting in his weathered hand. He does not raise his voice. He does not defend himself. He simply looks up at her with the calm of someone who has heard worse and survived it. Behind them, an older woman in a dark blue suit stands frozen in the doorway, both hands pressed to her mouth, because she alone understands the weight of what is about to happen. She knows exactly who that man is, and she knows the young woman pointing a finger at him has no idea what she has just done. What happens in the next 60 seconds will follow her for the rest of her life. Because the man she is humiliating right now, on his knees, in work clothes, in what she assumes is someone else's mansion, is about to become the most important person in deciding whether her entire future survives. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Vanessa had rehearsed this drive so many times in her head that when it finally happened, it felt strangely unreal, like she was watching herself from somewhere just outside her own body. She had spent the entire ride with her hands folded tightly in her lap, pressing her thumbnail into her palm the way she used to do in hospital hallways when a patient's family was waiting for news she did not want to be the one to deliver. She kept telling herself this was just a house, just brick and stone and glass, nothing more than that, the same way she used to tell herself a diagnosis was just a word, nothing that could hurt her unless she let it. But somewhere beneath that rehearsed calm sat a much older fear. One she had carried since she was 17 years old, standing outside a different kind of house, watching a family who had never once worried about a hospital bill walk past her mother without so much as a glance. She thought of her mother more in that car ride than she had allowed herself to in months, not because the estate reminded her of wealth, though it did, but because it reminded her of every room she had ever walked into feeling like she did not belong there. She remembered being 12 years old, standing in the doorway of a pediatrician's waiting room in a coat 2 sizes too small, watching another child receive a toy from a receptionist who had looked right past Vanessa's mother when she asked, quietly, if payment plans were available. She remembered the specific shame of that moment, not loud, not dramatic, just a small hardening in her chest that she had carried with her ever since, tucked so deep she rarely noticed it was there until a moment like this one pulled it back to the surface. She had told herself, driving up that long gravel road lined with trees older than her entire family history, that she would not let this house make her feel small the way that waiting room once had. She had built her entire adult life around that promise, working double shifts, refusing help she could not repay, standing her ground in rooms full of doctors twice her age because she had learned early that the moment you let someone see you flinch, they stop seeing you as an equal. What she did not yet understand, what she would not understand until it was far too late to take back, was that the same armor that had protected her for years was about to turn into the very thing that nearly destroyed everything she had built with Ethan, because armor does not know the difference between a threat and a man kneeling quietly on a floor, asking nothing of her at all. By the time the car slowed beneath the columned entrance, her heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with nerves about wedding planning and everything to do with a version of herself she had spent years trying to protect. A girl who had once stood in a waiting room feeling invisible, now stepping out of a car in front of a house, so large it seemed to swallow the gray afternoon light whole. She reminded herself, one last time, stepping out onto the gravel, that she was not here to be impressed. She was here to be Ethan's wife. She did not yet know that within the hour, she would meet a man on his knees in a quiet hallway, and that the words she chose to say to him would follow her further than any house ever could. Vanessa arrived at the Whitfield estate on a gray afternoon in early October, the kind of day where the sky refuses to commit to either rain or sun, and the wind moves through bare branches with a sound like something exhaling. The gates alone took her breath away in a way she resented immediately, because she had promised herself she would not be impressed by anything that money could buy. She sat in the back of the car Ethan had arranged for her, watching the estate unfold through the window, acre after acre of manicured lawn giving way to a house that looked less like a home and more like an institution. By the time the car came to a stop beneath the columned entrance, Vanessa had already built a wall around herself 3 layers thick, because the only defense she knew against feeling small was to make sure she never let anyone see her feel it. Rosalind Pierce met her at the door, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back into a knot so precise it looked architectural, and a voice that carried the particular calm of someone who had spent decades managing other people's chaos. She welcomed Vanessa warmly, offered her tea, walked her through room after room that seemed designed to remind a visitor of their own smallness. Vanessa nodded through all of it, said the right things, complimented nothing, because complimenting things felt like admitting she wanted them. She was led toward the East Wing, where the final details of the wedding reception were being finalized, past a library with ceilings 2 stories high, past windows that framed the gardens like paintings, until she reached a long hallway where the wood floor gave a faint, persistent squeak with every third step. That was where she saw him. An older man knelt near the far end of the hallway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a small toolbox open beside him, working at a loose floorboard with the patient concentration of someone who had done this kind of work his whole life. He wore plain trousers and a gray collared shirt, nothing that suggested wealth, nothing that suggested anything other than what Vanessa assumed the moment she saw him. He looked up briefly as she approached, offered a small nod, then returned to his work without another word. Vanessa felt something tighten in her chest, some old and familiar resentment rising up before she had even decided to let it. She thought of her mother's hospital room. She thought of every closed door money had shut in her face. And she let all of it land on a man who had done nothing to deserve it except exist in front of her at the wrong moment. She did not raise her voice. That was the detail that would haunt her later, the fact that her cruelty had not even required volume. She simply looked at him with the flat, dismissive tone she reserved for people she had already decided did not matter, and said the words that would follow her for the rest of her life. Must be nice, getting to work somewhere like this instead of somewhere that actually matters. The man did not flinch. He set down his tool, looked at her with an expression that held no anger at all, only something quieter and harder to name, and said only, "Everywhere matters to somebody." Vanessa did not answer. She walked past him toward the room where the wedding coordinator was waiting, already rehearsing in her mind how she would describe this moment to Ethan later, already certain she had done nothing wrong. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that the man kneeling on that floor was not fixing it because he had to. He was fixing it because his late wife Eleanor had loved that particular hallway more than any other room in the house. And every time the board loosened, he found himself down on his knees repairing it himself rather than calling in someone else, because it felt like the last conversation he still knew how to have with her. He was not testing Vanessa in that moment. He was grieving. But the two things would become impossible to separate in the days that followed, because a man who has learned to distrust every stranger who enters his family cannot help but notice when a stranger confirms every fear he has ever carried. Daniel Whitfield had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single manufacturing plant his own father had run into the ground and turning it, over 4 decades, into one of the largest industrial companies in the country. Along the way, he had learned 2 things with absolute certainty. The first was that money changes the way people look at you long before they ever get to know you. The second was that the people closest to you are capable of the deepest betrayals, because proximity is what makes betrayal possible in the first place. His son Ethan had married once before, years earlier, to a woman who had seemed kind and grounded right up until the divorce settlement cleared, at which point she vanished from their lives entirely, taking $5 million and leaving behind a version of Ethan that took years to rebuild. Daniel had watched his son crawl back from that loss one shift at a time, one 12-hour hospital rotation after another, rebuilding himself around a career that had nothing to do with the family name. So when Ethan called to say he was engaged again, Daniel did not celebrate first. He worried first. He asked Rosalind, quietly, in the privacy of his study one evening, to arrange a moment where he could observe this new woman before she ever knew who he was, because he needed to know who was marrying into this family before he handed anything to anyone, including his own trust. It was not a cruel plan when he conceived it. It was the plan of a man who had already lost one child's happiness to someone else's ambition and could not bear to watch it happen twice. What he had not accounted for was how much it would hurt to watch the same story unfold again, in real time, from a woman his son loved enough to propose to in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. Vanessa did not know any of this as she returned to the mansion 3 days later for a follow-up meeting about seating arrangements, and found the same man in the same hallway, this time repairing a light fixture near the kitchen. She did not recognize the flicker of recognition in his eyes, because she was too focused on her own irritation at having to interact with him again. She asked him, without looking up from her clipboard, to fetch her a coffee, the way she might ask any member of staff, and he did, without complaint, setting the cup down beside her with the same quiet patience he had shown days earlier. Rosalind, who witnessed the exchange from the doorway, felt her stomach drop, because she alone understood exactly who had just been asked to fetch coffee in his own home. Later that same afternoon, Vanessa made the comment that would circulate through the household staff by evening, though she never knew it had been overheard. Standing near the catering tent being assembled on the back lawn, she turned to one of the event coordinators and said, with a small laugh she thought was harmless, that some people mistake a mansion for meaning something, and that money like this always seems to attract people who never learned where they actually stood. She did not know Daniel was standing 3 feet behind her, having stepped outside to check on the tent poles himself, because he had always preferred doing physical work with his hands to sitting behind a desk giving instructions to others. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked back toward the house, and that evening, for the first time since Ethan had announced his engagement, Daniel sat alone in his study long after the house had gone quiet, turning a framed photograph of his late wife over in his hands, wondering how many more times his family would have to relearn the same painful lesson. Rosalind found him there near midnight, and in the gentle, direct way she had earned the right to speak to him after 30 years of loyal service, she asked him if he intended to say something before the wedding, or if he planned to let this play out the way it always did, in silence, until the truth arrived too late to matter. Daniel did not answer immediately. He told her only that he needed to know who was marrying into this family before he handed anything to anyone, the same words he had said weeks earlier. Except this time his voice carried a weight that suggested he already suspected the answer, and simply could not bring himself to accept it yet. Rosalind left the room without pressing further, because she had learned long ago that Daniel Whitfield made his hardest decisions in silence, and revealed them only when he was ready for the consequences. The engagement dinner was scheduled for the following week, a formal gathering meant to introduce Vanessa to the extended Whitfield family before the wedding, held in the estate's east dining room beneath a ceiling painted with a mural Eleanor had commissioned decades earlier. Ethan had insisted his father attend, unaware of the tension that had already built silently between the two people he loved most. Daniel arrived that evening in a plain dark suit, introduced by Rosalind to the gathered guests simply as a family friend named Dan, a small deception he had allowed to continue because he wanted one final, unguarded look at the woman his son intended to marry before the truth of his identity changed everything between them forever. Vanessa noticed him the moment she entered the room, recognized the same tired eyes from the hallway, and felt a flicker of something she refused to name as guilt, quickly buried beneath the comfort of a familiar assumption. If he was here as a guest, she reasoned, he must be exactly the kind of person she had already decided he was, someone who had worked his way into rooms like this without truly belonging in them. Over the course of the dinner, as wine was poured and conversation moved between polite introductions and family history, Vanessa found herself returning to him again and again with small, cutting remarks disguised as humor, comments about people who confuse proximity to wealth with earning it, comments about families who let just anyone sit at the table these days. Ethan, seated beside her, laughed uncomfortably at first, assuming she was simply nervous, until he noticed the growing stillness around the table, until he noticed his father's jaw tightening with every word. It was Daniel who finally broke the silence, setting down his glass with a quiet precision that drew every eye in the room toward him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He looked directly at Vanessa and said the sentence that would end the evening and, for a moment, threatened to end everything else alongside it. You have spent all night deciding what I am worth before you asked my name. The room went silent in a way that felt physical, a silence Vanessa would replay in her mind for weeks afterward, because in that instant she understood, without yet knowing the details, that she had made an enormous and irreversible mistake. Ethan turned to her, then to his father, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and dawning horror, as the pieces of the last several weeks began arranging themselves into a shape he did not want to see. Vanessa had one chance in that moment to stop, to ask the question that would have changed everything, to simply say she was sorry and ask who he truly was. Instead, cornered and humiliated in front of a room full of strangers who now knew far more about her character than she had ever intended to reveal, she chose pride over honesty. She stood, gathered her coat, and walked out of the dining room without another word, leaving behind a silence so complete that even the staff clearing the table that night spoke of it in hushed tones for days afterward. Ethan followed her out to the car, asking question after question she refused to answer, until she finally told him she needed time alone and disappeared into the guest house on the far edge of the property, where she spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every version of the evening that might have gone differently. She might have let the matter rest there, might have convinced herself by morning that she had simply been the target of an unfair and overly sensitive man who had taken offense at nothing, if she had not woken to find the morning newspaper resting on the guest house doorstep. Left there, she would later learn, on Rosalind's quiet instruction, because some truths are kinder delivered in private than announced in front of an audience. Before we continue, if you're finding this story gripping so far, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Vanessa's story. Vanessa unfolded the newspaper still standing in the doorway of the guest house, the cold morning air settling around her bare shoulders, and found herself looking at a headline that made the ground beneath her feel suddenly unstable. Whitfield Industries founder confirms retirement, named successor. Beneath the headline sat a photograph, professionally lit, the kind of image reserved for a man of considerable stature, and in that photograph she recognized, with a horror that seemed to hollow her out from the inside, the same tired eyes and quiet mouth of the man she had ordered to fetch her coffee 3 days earlier. The man she had humiliated in the East Wing hallway. The man she had a whisper, and asked the only question that mattered. She asked why. Rosalind, who had watched this same pattern unfold once before with tragic consequences, sat down across from her and explained, gently but without softening the truth, exactly what Daniel had been carrying for the past decade. She told Vanessa about Ethan's first marriage, about a woman who had seemed loving and grounded right up until the day the settlement cleared, about the $5 million that vanished along with any trace of affection the moment it landed in her account. She told her that Daniel had spent years afterward testing every person who came near his family, not out of arrogance, but out of a grief so deep he had never fully allowed himself to name it, because naming it meant admitting how much it had cost him to watch his son break the first time. Rosalind explained that Daniel did not attend that dinner as a test in the way Vanessa now imagined it, a calculated trap designed to catch her in a moment of weakness. He had attended it the way he attended every gathering since Eleanor's passing, quietly, without fanfare, hoping simply to observe his son's happiness from a comfortable distance. It was Vanessa's own cruelty, delivered without provocation, without cause, that had confirmed his deepest fear before he ever intended to test it at all. She had not failed a trial designed to trap her. She had, in an unguarded moment, revealed something true about herself that no trial could have manufactured, and that was precisely what made the wound so difficult to heal, because there was no test to retake, no misunderstanding to correct. There was only the truth of what she had done, sitting heavy and undeniable in the space between them. Vanessa left the kitchen that morning and walked, without any clear destination, back toward the East Wing hallway where it had all begun. She found the floorboard still loose beneath her feet, still squeaking faintly with every step, and she knelt down beside it the way she had seen Daniel do weeks earlier, though she had no tools and no skill for the work in front of her. She simply pressed her palm against the wood, feeling the give beneath it, and allowed herself, for the first time since her mother's death, to cry without holding anything back, not for herself, not for the wedding she feared losing, but for the version of herself she had let slip so easily into cruelty when confronted with a stranger she assumed did not matter. It was there that Daniel found her an hour later, having come to check on the same floorboard out of habit rather than intention, and stopped in the doorway at the sight of the woman who had humiliated him twice, now kneeling on the floor of his late wife's favorite hallway, weeping quietly with no audience to perform for. He did not speak at first. He simply stood there, watching, until Vanessa noticed him and rose quickly, wiping her face, bracing herself for whatever judgment was about to arrive. Instead, Daniel walked past her, knelt down himself, and continued the repair she had been unable to finish, working in silence for several long minutes before he finally spoke. Daniel listened in silence, his hands still for the first time since she had found him there, and when she finished speaking, he told her something that surprised her more than anything else that morning. He told her that he understood exactly what it meant to let an old wound speak louder than the truth in front of you, because he had done the same thing to her, testing her before he ever gave her the chance to simply be herself, assuming the worst before allowing her the dignity of proving otherwise. Neither of them, he said quietly, had entered that hallway as strangers. They had entered it as two wounded people, each expecting to be hurt by the other before either of them had said a single word. The conversation that followed was slow and unhurried, without the dramatic reconciliation Vanessa had feared or the icy dismissal she had braced herself for. Daniel did not offer forgiveness easily, and Vanessa did not ask for it easily either, understanding that trust, once broken in front of an entire family, could not be repaired with a single conversation on a hallway floor. What they built instead, over the following days, was something quieter and more durable, an honesty neither of them had extended to anyone in years. Daniel told her, eventually, about Eleanor, about the sound of that particular floorboard, and why he had never simply called in someone else to fix it permanently. Vanessa told him about the nights she had spent studying for her nursing boards with her mother's photograph propped against her textbooks, drawing strength from a woman who was no longer there to see her succeed. Ethan, for his part, spent those same days in a state of quiet devastation, uncertain how to reconcile the woman he loved with the version of her his father and the entire dinner table had witnessed that night. He did not confront Vanessa immediately, needing time himself to understand what he had seen, and it was Rosalind, once again, who became the bridge between two people too proud and too wounded to speak first. She told Ethan what she had told Vanessa, the full history of his father's fear, the full weight of what that first marriage had cost all of them, and she reminded him gently that the woman who had made that mistake was the same woman who had once called out an attending physician in front of a full trauma unit because she refused to let a patient's life be treated carelessly. People, she told him, were rarely only their worst moment, and rarely only their best one either. When Ethan finally sat down with Vanessa, 3 days after the disastrous dinner, it was not to demand an explanation but to offer one of his own, admitting that he had kept his family's history from her not to protect himself, but because he had wanted, more than anything, to be loved without the complication of his name attached to it. He admitted that in doing so, he had denied her the context that might have prevented everything that followed, and that his silence had been its own kind of dishonesty, no less damaging than the words she had spoken without thinking. It was, Vanessa realized as she listened to him, the first time either of them had been fully honest about what fear had cost them both. The wedding, originally planned for 3 weeks after that fateful dinner, was postponed by mutual agreement, not out of doubt, but out of a shared understanding that a marriage built on unspoken histories was not one either of them wanted to enter. Vanessa spent the following months working alongside Rosalind in small, quiet ways around the estate, not out of obligation, but because she had asked to understand a world she had judged too quickly, and Daniel, in turn, began attending her hospital fundraisers, standing quietly in the back of rooms filled with nurses and physicians, listening to a version of exhaustion and sacrifice he had never fully understood from the other side of a hospital bed. By the time the wedding finally took place the following spring, held not in the formal East dining room, but on the open lawn beneath a canopy of trees Eleanor had planted decades earlier, the guest list included not only the extended Whitfield family, but a dozen of Vanessa's fellow nurses from Dayton, several of whom had never set foot inside a home like this in their lives, and were greeted at the door not by staff, but by Daniel himself, who insisted on welcoming every guest personally, remembering, perhaps better than anyone else in that family, what it felt like to be looked at and judged before anyone bothered to learn your name. As Vanessa walked down the aisle that afternoon, it was not her late mother who walked beside her, an absence she had long grieved and would continue to grieve for the rest of her life, but Daniel Whitfield, who had asked her permission months earlier, quietly, without ceremony, if he might have the honor of standing in for a role that circumstance had left unfilled. She had said yes through tears she did not try to hide, understanding by then that the strongest bonds are rarely the ones we are born into, but the ones we choose to rebuild after we have broken them ourselves. At the reception that evening, held in the same hallway where it had all begun, now fully repaired and silent beneath every footstep, Daniel unveiled a small brass plaque he had installed near the floorboard himself, inscribed with only 2 words that meant more to everyone gathered there than any lengthy speech could have conveyed. Everywhere matters. Vanessa read those words standing beside the man she had once dismissed without a second glance, and understood, finally and completely, that the moment she had once been proudest of, the moment she believed she was standing up for herself in that hallway, had in fact been the moment she nearly lost everything that mattered most, and that the true measure of a person is never found in the moment they judge a stranger, but in what they are willing to rebuild once they understand exactly who that stranger was. If this story moved you, Let us know in the comments how it made you feel, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like Vanessa's.